Hello, my loves. Welcome to another episode of Euphoric, the podcast. I am here with Elly Young, and I can't wait for our conversation today because I've been wanting to bring this conversation to you, my listeners, for a really long time. And I was having trouble finding like an expert that I really liked and that the way they share about it and validate it. And I even interviewed someone once, and the interview wasn't usable. Like they really weren't an expert in this area. So dear friend, dear client, Elly Young is here today to talk all about hormone balancing and little biohacking and how this really resonates for women who are either sober curious or alcohol free and how it can really change everything. So I can't wait to go deeper into this. How are you doing today, Elly?
I'm great, Karolina. Thank you so much for having me on. This is a huge honor.
Okay, so hormone balancing, biohacking, these kind of terms are becoming a little bit more prevalent these days. So can you just like I love to just start one-on-one basis. Let's pretend we don't know anything about this. What is hormone balancing and biohacking in your estimation?
And cycle syncing is another kind of hot word right now that you'll hear me throw around a lot. And cycle syncing is essentially designed to balance our hormones. So as we age, starting in like your mid to late 30s, our hormones start to decline. Progesterone and estrogen start to decline, and they do so at different rates. And so the balance between those two hormones starts to get a little funky. And that's where we start to experience really uncomfortable symptoms that most of us just associate with PMS. We assume it's a given that we have to experience these things. We've been told our whole lives that this is just kind of the burden we bear as women. And what I have learned through cycle syncing is that we actually don't have to suffer from hormonal imbalance. Our hormones don't have to make us crazy. We don't have to gain weight. We don't have to be bloated. We can actually cycle sync to balance our hormones, which is essentially just with your diet, with your exercise, with your lifestyle, you can balance these so that they're in an optimal ratio with one another and you start to feel really, really good.
Yeah. So even though it's kind of becoming popular, I feel like there's still like an awareness gap and like a big black hole of like why this matters or like why you would want to do this. So can you tell us a little bit in your just in when you've worked with clients or just people you've done on yourself, this kind of transformation and just the people you talk to, what kind of symptoms are caused by like hormonal imbalances? What are things that we kind of chuck up to just like normality or getting older and stuff like that that actually aren't normal or can be improved and optimized? Like, is it skin issues? Is it bloat issues? Like, just give me the full gamut of the things that we would be experiencing with a hormone imbalance.
It's pretty much everything under the sun for women. I mean, for everything from weight issues, bloating, weight loss resistance, insomnia. A lot of women struggle with their sleep at this stage of life, your mood, any mood disorders, anxiety, depression, your energy levels, you know, just energy with how intense you can work out, as well as, yeah, your skin health. Estrogen is a really protective hormone. It's responsible for over 400 different functions in the body. And so as that starts to decline, we see women's health overall decline. And so that's why I like to coach women that we can nourish these things and support them so that we don't have to suffer so much in this decade of our life and the next several decades of our life, that we've kind of been taught that you just have to accept this decline and lose your beauty, lose your brain, your cognition. This is another really, really big one. The hormones keep our brains sharp. It keeps that tenacity and that kind of vivaciousness in us. And so when we start to lose that is when we go, okay, what is going on with my diet that I can actually tweak a little bit here to nourish and support the hormones to match my hormonal cycle.
Yeah. And when you mentioned this, like over 35-ish, like hormones are changing, all that kind of stuff, is that like already we're stepping into perimenopause? Is that coming later? What can we expect to see there? And what are some of those kind of imbalances that can be also fixed with like a lifestyle changes?
Yeah, so perimenopause is traditionally marked with a drop in the progesterone. So progesterone drops at a much faster rate. If you see it on a graph, estrogen kind of is on a slow decline as we age. Progesterone kind of drops dramatically in your 40s. And so that's why that gap between estrogen and progesterone gets kind of so much bigger, resulting in estrogen dominance. And so estrogen dominance is a kind of another hot word, but maybe there's a bit of a lack of awareness. Estrogen dominance is basically every bad PMS symptom you can think of, from heavy periods, sore boobs, breakouts, bloating, fatigue, insomnia. That can all be attributed to estrogen dominance. And so not only do we have our progesterone kind of dipping in this perimenopausal phase for women, our diets and the kind of the toxic environments that we live in now, and the stressful lives we live are all contributing to a raise in estrogen. So it's further exacerbating this kind of dominant situation that's going on. Um, Cortisol is one of the things that we can really check in with to help with our estrogen dominance problem there, because when we raise cortisol, stressful lives, drinking alcohol, um, and what happens there is the cortisol squashes our progesterone. So again, it's this gap between the estrogen and the progesterone that gets bigger and bigger. And that's when we really, really suffer.
I was just gonna ask that next question. I know we're both really passionate about the alcohol-free lifestyle. So, like, all of this is, happening naturally, and then, like you said, the environment, the foods we're eating these days, it's getting worse, this, like, instead of aging as, like, gracefully or, like, all this kind of stuff, it's just getting rougher and rougher, and we often don't know that it's all this kind of stuff, but when you throw alcohol on top of that, like, what other than that raising cortisol, what else is it doing?
Well, a lot of women don't know that we additionally have to detox our hormones, specifically estrogen. So while we have all these contributing environmental factors that are raising our estrogen, alcohol also raises your estrogen. And when the liver is going to detox, it prioritizes detoxing the alcohol instead of that estrogen, that excess estrogen. So it gets reabsorbed in the bloodstream and further exacerbates that estrogen dominance. So it's just kind of a, not only is it raising it, it can no longer detox it. So it's kind of a double whammy punch to creating more estrogen dominance in your system.
Yeah. And when you went alcohol free, like, tell me a little bit more about that story. Did you notice, like, was there an interest in first optimizing your hormones and then the alcohol piece came as a result of that? Or was it the other way around for you? And then, like, what changed for you when you were able to kind of have that foundation to remove that alcohol and hopefully lower that estrogen with that part at least?
Yeah. I was 39. I actually gave up alcohol just before my 40th birthday, and I had struggled probably, I was a gray area drinker for about a decade. And it was probably within the last year that I was really struggling with my relationship to alcohol. And I think a huge factor of that was my age. I was gaining weight. The same things that I had used in my past with exercise and diet weren't working anymore. I was seeing a lot of weight around my middle. I was also suffering from a lot of, I wouldn't say mood swings, I would say specifically rage. Like I had a couple of days of the month where I was just irrationally dissatisfied with life and very upset with people, my husband, anything that was basically in my path. And then of course you would start your period and be like, whoa, gosh, okay, that makes sense now. But I didn't have that when I was younger. So something was changing hormonally with me. And I had no idea that alcohol was contributing to that. So when I finally managed to cut alcohol out of my life just before my 40th birthday, my health improved dramatically. I lost a bunch of weight. I started sleeping great. I started feeling so much better in basically every aspect of my health. And that's when I was able to really fine tune my hormones. I caught wind of hormone balancing and cycle syncing. And I was like, okay, this is a priority for me in my 40s. I know things are kind of going haywire here, like what's going on? And when I dove into that science, it kind of became a North Star in my healing. I had a bad relationship with food. I had a bad relationship with exercise, usually because I was using food or dieting as a way to kind of course correct from my bad drinking. Or when I was using exercise in the same way, always kind of like in this punitive way, like, ooh, I overate and I drank too much last night. I'm going to like diet and take a bunch of supplements and work out really hard so I can feel better. And so my relationship with my body, my food, and exercise wasn't healthy. When I started cycle syncing, it shifted the whole meaning of food to me into much more, instead of dieting, I was nourishing my body. And I was doing so to support my hormones with the goal of mentally feeling better, physically feeling better, instead of the goal always being, I want to be skinny. I want to, I want to look good in a swimsuit. I live at the beach, so it's a year-round swimsuit potential situation here. And it was like, okay, I have a totally different motivation now with this cycle syncing because I am nourishing myself. It became much more of an act of self-love than one of kind of this a reward or a punishment type of situation.
Yeah. And I think like now as we're learning so much more about how different women's bodies are than men's, a lot of the studies we have on health came just from men, because they didn't want to test women of childbearing age, which is just crazy. Is that like all of that stress of the drinking, the cortisol, the like really punitive exercising and crash dieting, like could have literally contributing to more weight gain for women because our bodies are just so different, which is just so interesting how we've been, a little conditioned to kind of believe that we have to go hard all the time. So we have like a completely different body, completely different like, cycle than a man. Man's is the 24-hour cycle. Can you explain more about a woman's cycle, what the different phases are, and like some kind of go-to advice on what you would focus on for each cycle or portion of phase of the cycle?
Sure, totally. Yeah, so we have basically 4 phases of our cycle, and I'm glad you mentioned that, like comparing ourselves to men with regards to our nutrition and stuff. Yeah, there's been no studies on that. And one of the biohacking methods that I work with my clients on is fasting. And you can incorporate this into your cycle syncing lifestyle because there's ideal times to fast. And there are times when you definitely shouldn't be fasting because you should be nourishing your hormones. Progesterone in particular benefits from having more glucose in the body, more carbohydrate. And so I did this in the past. I would try and fast with my husband who was able to lose like 20 pounds and I could never do it. I would actually like gain weight during phases. I'm like, what's going on? So back to the 4 phases here. So you have your menstrual phase. That is day 1 through 5 of your cycle. And that's when you're, shedding your lining. And this is actually an ideal time to lean into a lower carbohydrate diet because your estrogen is low, but it is slowly starting to rise. Estrogen loves low glycemic, low blood sugar. It can tolerate a little more stress as well. So you can, as your energy provides, I know a lot of people don't feel great when they're on their period, but when you're a couple days into it and it starts to lighten up, you can increase the intensity of your exercise because estrogen thrives with a little more stress, a little more of that hormetic stress, which is that kind of good stress on your body. And so that's what we kind of do in days 1 through 5. Days 6 through 10 is called your follicular phase. And Dr. Mindy Pelz in her book, Fast Like a Girl, calls this the power phase. And when you are really in tune with your body, especially if you're alcohol free, you will feel this change in your hormones. You will actually start to feel your energy pick up. And at this point, estrogen is also on the rise. Progesterone is really low. All of your other hormones are really low. So we're just working on estrogen. So you can, again, focus on a lower carbohydrate diet and particular foods that help to nourish estrogen. Seed cycling is something that you might have heard of. So in the first half of your cycle, you want to consume seeds that help boost estrogen, and that is flax and pumpkin. And then as we get into that ovulatory phase, all of your hormones are peaking all at the same time. If you see a graph of it, it's like this little roller coaster. And it's like all the hormones are at the really kind of the tip of the roller coaster there. And at this phase, so would be about days 11 through 14, you're going to feel great. Our hormones make you feel really beautiful, powerful, energetic, talkative. This time of month is when you should be scheduling your social outings. I scheduled this podcast to sync right up with my ovulatory phase. It makes my brain, highly functioning. I'm quick and easy to talk to right now. And at this point, though, you do need to be working on detoxing that estrogen from your body. So we add in some cruciferous veggies, a lot of fiber, things that are going to support your liver and the detox of that estrogen, so that if you are someone who is perhaps has a little too much estrogen in your body from toxic diet, stress, whatever it is, your body's able to detox that. Then the next phase we go into is your luteal phase, and this is the kind of the back half of your cycle. This is when things start to slow down a little bit. Your energy is you're gonna notice it starts to kind of dip a little bit more. And this is when we can suffer PMS. And so at this point, progesterone is actually on the rise. We want to support progesterone with carbohydrates. So this is an ideal time to lean into, again, when I say carbohydrates, it's not a free for all pizza, French fries, all the things. We want to lean into nature's carbohydrates, things that are still going to have a low glycemic impact and that are going to provide a lot of veggies. And you want to vary your diet quite a bit. So, and that's just great for gut health to kind of have a variety of different foods at this time. Yeah. And so that is the luteal phase. Then you basically follow that. You nurture yourself during this phase. You dial back the exercise. You do things more like walking, yoga. It's a time for self-care. It's a time for reflection. And what I love about cycle syncing is that you're never in one phase too long with any diet or exercise or kind of connection or creativity focus. You really cycle in and out of these, and it feels really natural because you are in tune with what your hormones are ideally suited for at that time.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm super curious when I was looking at like the different dates for the, different phases of our cycle. They're not necessarily even, like the luteal seems to be the longer one. And so like they're kind of sometimes mapped to the seasons of the year. You have like winter, summer, spring, fall. Um, are we in like a down state a little bit more as women because of the luteal phase? And even though the menstrual phase starts to kick up towards the end, like at first it's pretty, it's winter.
Yeah, Dr. Sarah Gottfried is another kind of hormone expert that I love and follow, and I've learned a lot from. So she talks about this phase as it's actually hormone withdrawal. So as I mentioned, during the ovulatory phase, all of your hormones are peaking at the same time, and we feel really good during that time. In once progesterone peaks kind of around day 20 in your luteal phase, and then everything drops again. That withdrawal from hormones can feel bad because our hormones make us feel good. Progesterone has kind of a calming effect. It calms, it's kind of the counter to estrogen's fire. So when our progesterone drops, we can feel kind of crummy. We can have those rage days, we can have weepy, sad days. But the more balanced that you are with your nutrition, and you're, syncing your exercise. One of the things I had the hardest time doing is laying off the exercise, dialing it back and just taking it really, really easy. I actually successfully did this in the last 2 months, and I have gone into my cycles symptom free. I'm as shocked as you are. I was like, no, we can't go symptom free. There's always going to be something that comes up, like sore boobs or a day where you're just snappy at people. But I actually went into it and I was like, wow, I feel just as good as I did in the beginning half of my cycle. I would say my energy is still a little bit lower, but that's why you dial into these like nurture type of, lifestyles where you're instead of kind of go, 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 but you're not going to want to go, go, go. So it's really syncing up with what your hormones want you to do, which is at that point, it's like go inward, take care of yourself, relax.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I love these like recommendations and just the honoring of like the fluctuations of just like how the seasons of the year, that we have the seasons of the month basically.
Mhm.
So healthy nourishment can just mean so many different things to different people. And, this doesn't have to be some exact science, but I'm just curious if you were to look like at a plate of dinner food, like what would you make for yourself for each of the four phases?
Ooh, okay. I love this question. So during your menstrual phase, because you are losing a lot of iron, I would focus you this is a great time to have like a piece of red meat, and you want to have lots of nutrient dense veggies because again, you are losing a lot of those minerals. I also recommend drinking electrolytes every single day. I use Element. I'm not like affiliated with them at all, but that's just a great electrolyte to have to always be replenishing your salts. So I would have a piece of red meat. I would have a salad. And then I always eat lower carbohydrate during this phase. So I would have some healthy fat. Estrogen also really thrives off healthy fat. So olive oil in your salad dressing and maybe like an avocado on the side. I use the everything bagel seasoning. So that would be a thing. And I am not opposed to having treats. I love dark chocolate. I often make chia seed pudding in my lower carbohydrate phases. So a chia seed pudding made with like an almond milk, stevia, and a little cinnamon is just one of the best treats because it has also a ton of fiber. As you get into the follicular phase, again, this is your power phase. So you can lean more into low carbohydrate diet. But as that estrogen peaks, you're going to want to start adding more cruciferous veggies. So I love cauliflower rice. And one of my favorite recipes with cauliflower rice is to add a tablespoon of butter, chopped up pistachios, and I have this amazing spice. It's called like the six spice. It's a healing spice. You can get it on Amazon. Just Google six spice, and it has like six different kind of Ayurvedic healing spices that are great for like inflammation. And it kind of has a turmeric-y kind of Middle Eastern kind of flavor. It's really good. And I just add maybe a piece of fish to that, salmon again, something healthy fats in it. As I get into the late luteal phase or the luteal phase, I would have, or even, oh, so I skipped ovulation. Ovulation phase, this is what I had for lunch. I made myself some awesome sweet potatoes. I love the Japanese murakami. I add olive oil, salt, and nutritional yeast, just a tablespoon of that. It makes the potatoes like kind of crunchy, crispy, like French fries. And then as you get into that luteal phase, you're going to want to amp up your carbohydrate there as well. You can do a lot of squashes, spaghetti squash, um, zucchini, things like that, where again, focus on nature's carbohydrates because they're going to be nutrient dense. There's going to be a lot of fiber, and but it will have enough carbohydrate in there to support that progesterone, which needs glucose to thrive.
Yeah. And so when you look at like nature's carbohydrates, like what about things like corn, potatoes, or wheat? I know the processed versions can be like just crazy what nature compared to what nature originally provide. But do those get a bad rap? Is there some healthy version of those that we can incorporate into this phases, or do you stick to more of the like more veggie based carbs?
I do stick to more of the veggie-based carbs. Potatoes are great as long as you're not frying them, it's not as long as it's not a French fry. Potatoes can be really nutrient dense and, a good carbohydrate to have. I would lean more into the sweet potato kinds. Or the yams and anything with more color. The purple sweet potatoes are going to be more antioxidant rich. Um, as far as wheat goes,
Or any other grains?
yeah, so the grains I would lean into are quinoa, farro, something that is a lighter grain and more nutrient dense than say like a rice. And as the wheat, again, if a lot of people are gluten free, a lot of people don't tolerate it. I would say if you're going to have like a piece of bread, go for sourdough. Like try and get some like from your farmer's market. That's really like a beautiful, fresh sourdough.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And corn, like just
Corn gets a bad rap. If you're gonna get like fresh corn on the cob, great. If it is gonna be like made into a corn tortilla, again, try to go things that are less processed and more, freshly made. And corn isn't like totally off the table though. It's something you could have in the luteal phases or any of the phases when you would be eating carbohydrate, which is your ovulation phase and your luteal phase.
yeah, yeah. So, like, when you put all this together, like we just talked about the nutrition part, a little bit on the exercise part. I know there's a lot of other lifestyle things that you can do. There's the seeds, there might be some supplements here. Is there like a protocol that you like when you're working with a client that you put all this together, like very personalized for her so that like you work through this like in a really guided fashion?
Yeah, totally. One of the first things I start my clients off with is like a custom calendar. A lot of people say, "Wow, this is a lot of information. I can only, soak up so much." And so what we do is we sit down and we determine most important thing you need to know is when your day one of your cycle is, or get as close to ballparking it as you can. And then we sit down and we just color code it. Like these are your days when you're going to be leaning into more of a low carb diet. These are the days. And then I have like a little key for them that says, this is what your energy is going to be like. This is the strengths. What I want women to really shift their mindset from is seeing their cycle and seeing their hormones as this kind of burden, as the enemy that hormones make us crazy. Your hormones make you incredibly powerful, and we've never been taught that. And so that's what I try to educate them on. Is like this is what your hormones are going to make you great at during this phase. And then that way you say, what, how can I align my life to that? It's never going to be perfect. You're never going to be able to make your work life work exactly according to your cycle. But if you have some flexibility and you have some choice in things and you can kind of align it a little bit better, the more you do that, the more you're going to start to see like, wow, this is working for me.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I love this. I think it's so valuable. I took so many notes. I know our listeners are taking notes as well and can't wait to, ping you to see what working with you looks like. Okay, I'm curious about some of the other biohacking methods that you incorporate into your life between like cold plunges and sauna and other things, especially as it relates to women who are reevaluating alcohol or are alcohol free already. Tell us a little bit about those practices.
Yeah, this is another thing that I dove way deep into in my alcohol-free journey. Not only because I was looking to heal, but also because I I'm like a dopamine chaser. I'm an ex-college athlete. I played soccer, and so I've always thrived on kind of pushing the limits of my body. And I think that's a big reason why I ended up drinking as much as I did, is because I was always like able to not only pursue more, but tolerate more. And so learning how to biohack has been something that has allowed me to learn how to dopamine stack in a healthy, incremental way that's sustainable, that's not going to burn me out. And when I say biohacking, a lot of people get a little like intimidated. They think it means you have to do a bunch of blood tests and take a bunch of crazy expensive supplements. My version of biohacking is really daily practices that you can incorporate that are basically utilizing your body's own pharmacy to heal and make you feel really good. It is all about boosting that dopamine. Yeah, and so one of the ones I have a cold plunge at home, but if you don't have a cold plunge, you can always take a cold shower, 20 seconds. It's really the contrast is what's going to give you that big boost. So you want to do it at the end of your shower after you've already been nice and hot, or if you've worked out, and then blast yourself as long as you can tolerate it for. I actually have a harder time doing a shower for some reason than I do getting into my cold plunge. The cold plunge is like you just kind of jump in and there's no like easing yourself into it. With the shower, I'm always like, oh, I can dodge it. I can dodge it. So that is one of the best ways to boost dopamine, especially if you are in kind of those early stages of giving up alcohol and you are looking for something to really give you that thrill or that kind of boost, that excitement. Cold plunging is awesome. And the high from it, the dopamine boost, lasts for like 2 to 3 hours. So it's a wonderful way. It also provides a ton of clarity, a lot of creativity. I always do it before a podcast because I know I'm going to be a little sharper after I do. Um, One of the other biohacking methods that I recommend is sauna. And again, I'm very fortunate that I have invested all the money I used to spend on alcohol on my own little wellness studio in my house. So I now have an infrared sauna as well.
I love
And
how you said that.
yeah. Yeah, because it does seem like, oh, good for you. You have all these things at home. And it's like, I saved up and I put it on a payment plan, and you can too. We were spending a lot of money going out to eat on alcohol, my husband and I. So, and he gets to benefit from all of the biohacking that I have provided for him. Yeah, so the sauna is another excellent way to not only detox your body, but also just heal in miraculous ways. It's literally good for every single system in your body. Um, yeah, so those are the two main ones that I recommend. And if you obviously, you don't have these in your homes, but there are more and more studios popping up, these kind of wellness studios where you can go and pay a membership or just do a drop in and utilize those things. And that can be a great way to reward yourself in those early stages of, if I make it 5 days alcohol free, I'm going to book a date for myself at one of these wellness studios and treat myself to a cold plunge, contrast therapy day, cold plunge and sauna.
Yeah, yeah. I love them both. We had another expert on cold immersion on the podcast, and I was sharing that I first learned about it from Wim Hof, and I would do the cold shower thing, which you're right. I think is kind of harder because you're just like, this isn't normal. Like, I'm not used to this cold water coming out. But then like anytime I have the opportunity, I don't own a cold plunge yet, but anytime like spas have them oftentimes, Korean spas or just normal ones, like wellness centers and stuff like that, or naturally, like the Pacific Ocean is damn cold right now. There's just so many different options out there, lakes, all that kind of stuff. And then saunas too. Like I had a spa that had one, and we'd go to pretty regularly with that membership. But so hotels sometimes, cruise ships, like they're just like little fun options that you can definitely find out there. Now, is there a difference between like an infrared sauna? Is that like the best bet for you to go, or is just any kind of sauna is going to have those benefits?
I would say this is a debatable point amongst sauna people. Some say that the infrared isn't as good because it doesn't get as hot as a traditional sauna. But my infrared sauna gets crazy hot. It gets up to 140, and we have a red light in there as well. And I'm dripping sweat. And I can barely tolerate it for more than like 20 minutes. And then I'm like, okay, I've had enough. I start to get antsy. So I guess it just depends on you. And again, it doesn't have to be extreme. I want people to understand that like I'm a unique person. I've pushed my body in a lot of different ways. So my extreme is going to be different than yours. But any time you're kind of taking yourself to your own little personal edge is going to be beneficial for you. That hormetic stress that I talked about, that's where you're basically kicking your body's stress system on in a good way. It starts to turn on your immune system. It starts to turn on all these healing mechanisms in your body. And that's really what you're looking for. It doesn't have to be this miserable, brutal thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what I also love about this as it relates to alcohol is that, for a long time when we wanted to feel good, we push on the pleasure side of our brain with alcohol or food or scrolling on social media, right? What these practices are about doing is to actually kind of push on that pain side a little bit. Like with exercise, it's a little difficult, or with the cold plunge, it's a little hard, or the sauna, it's a little uncomfortable. And what your brain does is it rewards you with all of the feel good chemistry. And so it's just like a different way of using that function of your brain that wants to achieve homeostasis to work for you in a much more sustainable, healthy way.
Yeah. Oh, I love that so much. I think it's such a relevant conversation for, sober curious alcohol-free women to be like really investing and entertaining this kind of concept in their lives. And I'm just curious when it comes to like at least these two practices we talked about, does it map to your cycle? Should you be doing like some on some days and not on others? Or is it kind of a free-for-all with these two? What do you think?
That's a really good question. Yeah, so progesterone does not like stress. It wants to be nurtured. It wants to have a low stress environment. And so, no, I wouldn't recommend one working out hard during the later luteal phase. You can kind of divide the luteal phase into two sections. The early luteal phase, when you're just coming out of ovulation, those first 5 days, you can actually tolerate a little more stress, a little more exercise, and even a lower carbohydrate diet. But days 20 through 28, that is when you really want to dial things back and start taking care of yourself. And so I don't cold plunge during those days. I do sauna because I'm still interested in detoxing any excess estrogen out of my body. And yeah, so that's when I wouldn't do something that is pushing my body like the cold plunge. I do notice when I'm ovulating, when your hormones are peaking, you are a lot more sensitive. And so the cold plunge is definitely, you're going to feel it a lot more. Maybe you just don't do it as long. I try to go 3 minutes, but maybe on that time I'll only go about a minute.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that too. And I'm curious, like with we talked a little bit about the difference between like the male and the female body. Are there any biohacking trends that maybe aren't as applicable to females, or like we should be doing them differently that we haven't touched upon yet? And maybe there's some that we've already talked about a little and you already gave us the advice, but I'm just curious, like when you start kind of dipping your toe into this world or like red light therapy, like all the different things, the supplements, all that kind of stuff, is it still mostly catered for the male body? And there's like the fasting, all this kind of stuff. There's a little bit of a difference or a tweak for women. What have you learned so far?
Yeah, I would say fasting is the biggest one and the one I'm most familiar with that was so different, for men and for women. And, all the conclusions were just mixed with women. They were like, yeah, some women can lose weight and others can't. And, but what they noticed is like women who were out of menopause had a lot of success with fasting. And that's because they weren't cycling anymore. It was essentially the cycle was throwing off any good results with fasting because there's a whole section, two different sections of your period or your cycle when you shouldn't be starving yourself. It's not starving, but it's when you shouldn't be depleting your body of glucose because your progesterone needs that glucose to thrive. And when progesterone is getting what it needs, it can stay in balance with estrogen. And estrogen dominance also creates weight loss resistance. So that's what we see a lot as women age, is this inability to lose weight. And if they were trying to fast during these times, the 8 days before their period, they were going to see estrogen dominance increase and weight loss resistance increase. And they're like, what am I doing wrong here? And I saw this firsthand with myself compared to my husband. And you feel crummy, not to mention you just feel terrible doing it.
Yeah, yeah, that's such a good point. So how do we make this easier? Do you have like a resource or a guide that you can share like that kind of encapsulates a little bit about what we talked about so that my listeners, really get the tune of this?
Yeah, I do. I put together it's my top 10 key strategies to master your hormonal health. It's on my website, findmyselffree.com. You just pop over there and I will send it to you. And it's a lot of what we covered today. It's the basics that will get you started in learning about your cycle, the kind of the intro to cycle syncing, and just some kind of biohacking strategies that you can use to feel better.
Yeah, I love that. Well, we'll be sure to include that in the show notes and the link below. And what I love about this conversation, Ellie, so much is that like it is becoming more, I think, a popular, topic and subject. However, I still think there's this huge gap of awareness of like where someone's struggling with a symptom or like you said, insomnia or skin issues or gut or like they're gaining more weight over time, all of these different things that don't seem as related and like not understanding that like this is the solution. And I think that's so critical, and it's also just worth trying. Like everything you mentioned, there was not one expensive supplement you told us about or one like crazy thing to do. Even the hot cold, like you said, you could do in your shower, is something that you could try. It's worth trying this kind of stuff to see if it alleviates symptoms, and definitely with like the guidance and support of a mentor who can walk you through it, because I think I became aware of my cycle like maybe a few years ago, probably about the time I went alcohol free, I started learning about it. But especially now, as we're on the conception journey, like I've learned so much more. So it's almost like life kind of forces you to learn about it. Otherwise, you could be blind about it to the rest of your life. But you can optimize your health, your aging, your energy, like the fuel you have, like your radiance, all the things we talked about by just trying some of these like practices and just tuning in a little more. Or even like what I loved how you shared earlier, how you noticed that you had more rage on certain days. Like, do you have your clients ever track their symptoms like based on the day, or keep like a food log or like a um, experience log or a symptom log or something like that?
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of cool apps out there for recording this stuff, but I still encourage my clients to keep a journal about kind of a food diary, a food log about what you're doing, and just making any correlations with how you feel. And I also remind people that you are a study of one. What works for me isn't necessarily going to work perfectly for you. And you have to know your own body and really tuning in. And that's why the alcohol free component is so important, because it's really tough to listen to your body and to understand your symptoms if you're also dealing with a hangover, if you're also in recovery or detox mode from alcohol. And so this is really just a magical way for women to get back in touch with their bodies, to truly listen, to develop a healthier relationship with food, with exercise, with the idea of nourishing themselves, with real true self-care. And that's
Yeah.
why I love it so much, because it's a moving target. Every month is a new month that you get to try and kind of get a little bit better and fine tune and learn from your choices. But I also love that it's not super restrictive, because you are cycling in and out of these things. And it's not like, hey, we're never going to eat this type of food and we're never going to eat that. It's literally just living in harmony and listening to your body in a much more authentic way that shows that you love yourself.
Yeah. Well, I love that being in tune with your body. And it's so interesting. When I ditched alcohol, like I noticed so many, like I was a little bit more sensitive to caffeine and sugar. And I feel like almost I use this analogy sometimes with clients that like if you like just hit your hand against a wall over and over and over, eventually you won't feel it. Like you'll get calluses and it'll just like numb up those nerves, you know? And it's almost like what we do to our bodies with alcohol. Like we literally stop feeling our body and then you remove that numbing agent and you start to heal. And at first, maybe all these things come up that aren't as pleasant, you know, but it's like, no, your body's, it's always been there, those signs. You just couldn't feel them as much. And you get to get so much more in tune. And I think like that feeling of like, when you know viscerally, it's not a fact about alcohol being bad for you, but you actually like feel it in the moment, like it starts to like really turn you off from drinking. I feel like that's happened to me with a few other things. Like I remember this Halloween, I don't usually like eat a ton of dessert or sugar, but like, you know, Halloween's around, right? And I totally noticed I had one little baby little like mini candy bar. And what do I have the next day but a headache? You know what I mean? And it's like that level of like evidence. Like, you know, we know sugar's bad for us or whatever, but like actually having that visceral, wow, that's how quick my body responds and it's just not worth it. That actually really loses the desire for something versus just like the, oh no, it's a bad thing. You know what I mean? So same thing. If like you notice that eating like really heavy carb at the beginning of your cycle just doesn't work for you, it doesn't make you feel good. Like it's so much easier to do things when we really pick up those little differences and then like you said, live in harmony. So
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. I know one other thing I'll add here that's really translates well from if you have done the work to get alcohol free, the thought work around, this idea that alcohol was a reward. I see a ton of similarities with food. Like we have
Mm,
treated food as a reward for a really long time. And we're either been a good girl and you're like, oh, I did really good. I deserve to have this treat. Or a lot of times if we're on vacation, we say, I'm going to throw my diet out the door because I'm on vacation. I deserve this as a reward. But then what happens is we end up feeling crummy, our tummy hurts, we get bloated, we gain weight, and we're like, whoa, was that really a reward? And so investigating this and changing that belief into like, what is truly a reward for me? It's not the piece of cake or the French fries or the pizza, and that type of thought work that you can apply from your work done with alcohol into the food space is really powerful. And I love to do this with my clients, especially around fasting as well. When we start to get into the fasting and we say, hey, you are not starving yourself. You're allowing your body to heal and you're releasing growth hormone and you're resetting your gut. And so all these things instead of I'm punishing myself because I'm not eating. That shift for people can be really profound and powerful and change your entire relationship with your body.
mm. Well, such a good conversation. I could go on so much more. I just have so much more questions about this. I was taking so many notes. So we definitely have the guide for our listeners. We're going to have that in the show notes. Anything else coming up we should be aware of just to tune into?
Yeah, depending on when this airs, I'm actually launching the Balance Challenge. It starts May 3rd and goes through the month of May, and it's essentially a cycle syncing challenge. I'm gonna have a library of resources and content for people because we're all at different phases of our cycle. You're gonna be able to, go onto my platform and access all the tips and tricks to cycle sync your lifestyle for the time phase that you're in. And it's a 28-day challenge and it's only $28. So there's really nothing to lose. It's a great way to introduce you to these concepts and to start healing and loving your body.
Yeah, love it so much. We'll also put that in the show notes. So be sure if you're listening in time to get on that. I mean, there's just so much like confusing and competing and just all this kind of information out there, like to actually have it all put together by you. And sounds like you've experimented so much with your own clients and with your own body to know, like what really works here. So you so much knowledge here, so much wisdom. Thank you so much, Ellie. We really
Thank
appreciate you.
you. I had so much fun. This is a huge honor. I really appreciate it.